resolution. If you haven't already, go ahead and sign in. I think, are we recording already? All right, I'm
Yeah,
gonna
we're
start.
recording.
Oh, we are. Okay, great. So I don't have to start that then. So I'm just going to dive in. Thank you all for being here for alternative dispute resolution for special education. What is it and what can my team do to avoid it? I'm Adriana Aro. I am a supervisor here in San Francisco Unified. Oh, I sprinkled memes throughout because I feel like it's the right time of year for that. If you think they're dumb, that's okay, but um, it's a fun Instagram if you are interested. It's at School Psych Memes on Instagram. But anyway, I'm Adriana Aro. I am your guide for this program. If you're able to, I'd love to see your faces. It feels much less alone when we are presenting on Zoom, if you're able to do that. Don't forget to mute if you're not talking and, be participatory as appropriate. And then, of course, we have our norms, keeping liberation for the oppressed at the center, being solution oriented, and being present and comfortable in discomfort. I also wanted to include a little link before we got to the agenda to our VVGG, Vision, Values, Goals, and Guardrails. Both of these images are clickable, so it'll take you to the webpage if you need copies of those. Um, and then I wanted to share the special education mission statement. Just a quick show of little Zoom hands. If you click on your reactions and raise your hand, how many of you knew that we had a special education mission statement? Raise your hand if yes. Oh my gosh, one whole person. Okay, well, good. I'm glad I'm sharing this with you all. So our SPED mission statement is being committed to providing innovative, effective services resulting in positive outcomes for the lifelong success of students, specifically special education students. And then in compliance with state, federal regulations, specialized academic instruction and related services are designed to meet the needs of students with a qualifying disability as outlined in each student's individualized education program. And one thing that Jean Robertson, the Associate Superintendent for Special Education, likes to say is that laws are good for kids. So if we're following the law and we're meeting our obligations, our kids are going to have better outcomes in special education. So I feel like this mission statement speaks to that. Any questions from attendees on mission statement or any thoughts that folks would like to share? All right. So to the agenda. So I'll take a minute to introduce myself. I'll talk about what alternative dispute resolution is. That's sort of the key part of my role here in SF Unified. We'll talk about preventing disputes, so timelines, hints, and tips, and then we'll talk about how you can access support if needed. If we have time, we'll talk about case studies, and of course, there'll be time for questions and answers. All right, so as I said, I'm Adriana Aro. I'm the Special Education Supervisor for Dispute Resolution and Compliance. What that means is that I run this alternative dispute resolution program, but I also keep track of CDE complaints about special education and due process and settlement agreements related to special education. And what we're doing as a team here is we're looking for patterns of what may be causing these complaints and maybe even, areas where they may be coming out of. And we're starting to think about what sort of training school sites might need in order to prevent these CDE complaints, due process filings, and settlement agreements from happening. There's a link to a legal presentation at the end of this presentation. And there's a slide there that talks about how much we're spending on settlement agreements in SF Unified. So we really want to bring that down by being in compliance and resolving disputes at the lowest level possible. So I had 10 years as a mild moderate special education teacher before coming into this role. I taught high school the entire 10 years. I volunteered at I didn't volunteer. I went to Lawton last week and I spent a lot of time with the kindergartners and I was like, haha, you are very cute, but this is why I teach high school. But it was really fun. They're super cute. I say I'm a veteran co-teacher because almost my entire teaching career was spent co-teaching. I was the teacher of record alongside a general education teacher, and we would different teachers over the years, but we complemented each other by having one person be the content specialist and one person be the pedagogy specialist, and we could kind of marry those skill sets and create a really accessible and wonderful general education curriculum for our mild to moderate students. And so I also, at the first school site that I worked at, I also created a co-teaching program. So co-teaching is something that's really near and dear to my heart. If you ever want to talk about what co-teaching looks like at your site or what we're calling co-teaching, I'm happy to have conversations about that. Before I became an educator, I had a career in commercial property management, which was awful and I hated it, but I did it for 8 years anyway. And then I became a teacher, which was way better. And then I really love rules, which probably makes sense considering my job title, but I can think outside the box and I welcome feedback because sometimes I have really quick thought processes that say, no, this is how we do it, but somebody else has a better way. And I want to hear those better ways because if I can adapt my thinking, I can grow and our programs can grow. So that's a little bit about me. And we do have a definition of alternative dispute resolution from state SELPA. And if you don't know what a SELPA is, it is basically a state agency that is mostly county-based and supports special education programming in every single school district in the state. So alternative dispute resolution is an informal method of settling disagreements using techniques to promote understanding, open communication, and arrive at satisfying solutions to conflicts. ADR is designed to strengthen relationships and meet the interests of all parties involved to reach a mutually agreeable outcome, rather than having a decision made by a third party, such as a hearing officer or a judge. So this is an umbrella term. This can include all sorts of different strategies, all different means of resolving conflict, as long as it's not a legal means. So it's avoiding those CDE complaints, it's avoiding due process, and it's avoiding getting into a situation where we're needing to work with legal to come to a settlement agreement. And the terms in bold are things that I think are really relevant, especially the part about finding a mutually agreeable outcome. Much like an IEP, ADR is not a magic bullet, it's not a band-aid, it's a process. And eventually we're going to get to something that's mutually agreeable if everybody wants to continue down that path. However, sometimes it doesn't work and it's voluntary, so we go on to try other things. Little bit about San Francisco Unified's ADR program. The CDE piloted funding for alternative dispute resolution in 2016, and it wasn't with every single district or every single SELPA. San Francisco was selected as an early utilizer of ADR. We ended up using those funds. I think it was about $40,000 at the time to partner with the Bar Association of San Francisco and create an ADR program. We created that initial template and we haven't really changed the ADR program a ton, but there have been some new ideas sprinkled in due to COVID and other things that have arisen. And one of the things that makes San Francisco Unified unique is that we're a single district SELPA. Most SELPAs are at the county level. So like San Mateo County SELPA has like 36 districts that they serve. Santa Clara County has like 5 SELPAs that serve countless districts. So there's all sorts of different ways the SELPAs are set up, but we're really unique in that we're a single district SELPA, and there's only a few of those in the state. So that's and I guess if you were in one of the districts that had a multi-district SELPA, the funding would be held at the SELPA level, and then it would support the districts versus San Francisco Unified, where we're all just kind of one. All right, so you're probably wondering, okay, great, that's all very interesting backstory, but what the heck is ADR? So we have a few different ways that we implement ADR here in SFUSD. So we have 3 core strategies. Those are listed here on the left side of the chart. So we have communication strategy sessions, we have facilitated IEPs, and we have collaborative conferences. And these are all facilitated by somebody from the Bar Association or a contractor with the Bar Association who is a trained mediator who has background and experience in special education, either as some sort of special educator or as an attorney that has worked with school districts. So no matter which of these strategies you choose, you will be working with a neutral facilitator through the Bar Association. The communication strategy session is kind of like an entry level ADR strategy. It's a great way to have a one-on-one meeting with that facilitator, figure out how you want to communicate, maybe decide if you need a higher level of support. And there's also sometimes they offer office hours so you can just kind of drop in. Facilitated IEPs are just what they sound like. They're very specifically for disputes related to the IEP where there isn't really a relational dispute. It's just like you keep going back and forth about goals, or you keep going back and forth about the offer of FAPE, or there's something that the team is kind of getting stuck on and you feel like you're talking in circles. but the relationship's still good. So it's I think well, yeah, that's all I'll say about that. And then we also have a collaborative conference, and that's more like a traditional mediation. It's for repairing relationships, it's for resolving disputes. It's an attorney-free zone. Obviously, an IEP, we can't stop someone from bringing their attorney, but in a collaborative conference, we can prevent somebody from bringing their attorney and vice versa. We don't bring our attorneys as a school district. The conversation is guided by a neutral facilitator, and it's a much more involved facilitation than, say, a facilitated IEP. There's a lot more questions happening. There's a lot more of, okay, did you hear what this side said? All right, great. Can you put it in your own words? Okay, now we switch to the other side. It's very structured. One of the things that's really important about the collaborative conference is that it allows families to speak for themselves when they feel like there's some sort of power differential. So while families can't bring an attorney, they can sometimes, and they do sometimes bring an advocate. So one of the ground rules that we request is that the advocate lets the family speak for themselves and lets them find their voice. And the goal is really to build a relationship so that the team can move forward independently and doesn't need a facilitator at every meeting moving forward. There's a few commonalities between each of these strategies. They are family facing. So we're really trying to make sure that we're bringing the family into the fold, making sure that they're feeling like a team member. Any conversation that you have with a facilitator is confidential to the extent that it can be. So, like, new information that is shared is confidential. But let's say something has been a broader conversation, like the goals in an IEP. If you're talking about that in a collaborative conference, that doesn't mean you can't talk about goals in the IEP meeting 2 days later to formalize everything. You can always follow up as needed with the facilitators. So let's say only a partial agreement was met in a collaborative conference and you just need to decompress and you know, unpack what happened. You can talk to the facilitator about that. Facilitators can share factual information so they can confirm, like, yes, that's accurate, but they're not offering legal advice and they aren't offering their own opinion. They're humans, but they're neutral when it comes to the resolution of these problems. Like I've said several times, we want to build relationships. We want to make sure that that facilitator is neutral. And one thing that I forgot to put on this list is that it's voluntary. So nobody has to participate in alternative dispute resolution if they don't want to. And that happens, I would say maybe 10% of the time. I'll get a call from a school site saying that they really want to have a collaborative conference or a facilitated IEP. And we talk about, like, what's been going on with the family and what their personalities are like. And we kind of strategize who would be the best person to introduce the idea. And sometimes we call and we say, hey, we'd really like to have a facilitated IEP, or we'd really like to have a collaborative conference. We think it'd be really helpful. Usually it's framed, it'd be helpful for us to understand you better. And sometimes families are just like, excuse me, do you think we have a problem? And they want nothing to do with it. I've never seen somebody say, no, thank you, and move on. It's always like, it's always a shock that we're offering this. On the other side, sometimes staff members don't participate. In a collaborative conference, we typically have the special education supervisor for that school. We will have a school site administrator, preferably the school site administrator who's been most involved in that student's IEP, and the case manager, so that they can, one, grow their capacity, and two, be sort of the channel of information flow after the collaborative conference. And I've had case managers decline to participate in a collaborative conference, and we make it work anyway, especially if it's something that's really important to the parent. And we just figure out another way for someone else to be a conduit of information sharing. And we make our own plan internally to go through and support that case manager, and help them, outside of the meeting, to rebuild relationships. Any questions about alternative dispute resolution strategies that are offered here in the district?
I had one question.
Yeah, go for it.
So I've experienced this, and
Uh-huh.
one of the
Yeah.
things I really that I guess didn't work for us was I appreciate the philosophy of moving forward,
Hmm.
but I do really think that if there's a dispute, there needs to be a conversation about what happened.
Hmm.
And I know that it can be contentious.
Hmm.
But even though we were in a dispute with the parent and everything, we all left with the same feeling of, well, why couldn't we talk about it?
Mm-hmm.
Because everything was about moving forward. So it
Mm,
didn't actually resolve anything, and it didn't actually, we weren't able to get into it. So
right.
I don't know if this is a question or more of just a request. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think, especially within the collaborative conference, it's important to be, it's like restorative practice. You can't get through it without talking
Mm-hmm.
about what happened. So
Mm-hmm.
this was a few years ago. So I think it might
Mm-hmm.
have been more at the beginning. So I just want to really emphasize that not having that devalues being able to move forward. So just really
Yeah.
want to, even if it's contentious, I mean, I still think it needs to be had.
Yeah, that's really good feedback. Yeah, and I agree. I think there needs to be acknowledgement of why we got to where we are. And I think that is something that's changed a little bit, evolved over the last couple of years.
Cool.
And our facilitators are more experienced now too versus 3 years ago. So I think
That makes
things
sense.
might unfold a little bit differently.
Cool.
But that's great feedback, and I will definitely share that with our leader at the Bar Association so they can pass that along.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions or comments about current ADR strategies or the ADR program? I'm just taking a note so I remember to say that or tell our partner. Okay, so this is probably what you're all here for because you probably don't want to take time out of your day and out of your schedule to have some sort of ADR intervention. The facilitated IEP can be all kind of work together. A communication strategy session is sort of scheduled on your own time, but a collaborative conference can take up to, well, it is scheduled for 2 hours, and then the facilitator has 2 hours of prep time prior to meet with all of the participants. And it's really hard to coordinate that many people. And so I personally would love to work myself out of a job, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. So I'll just give some hints and tips about what we might do to prevent getting to an IEP dispute in the first place.
Oh,
Oh, I keep forgetting I sprinkled in these memes. I don't know why I did that. It's funny. I'll give you all a moment to giggle to yourselves. All right. All right. So the number one way to prevent IEP disputes. Does anybody want to take a guess? I animated this on purpose so that I could make you guess. What do you think the number one thing you could do to prevent IEP disputes is? You can even type it in the chat. I'll see if I can see the chat.
Make sure they happen.
Make sure they happen. You're on the right track.
I mean, I would just
Clear,
say, like,
consistent
keeping
communication.
connected. Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, keeping connected. And then a couple of people said in the chat, clear, consistent communication, relationship with the parents, open communication with parents. Yes, you are all on the right track.
Make sure everybody that the parent wants at the IEP is present. And if they're
Yep.
not, that they're informed ahead of time why they're not there.
Yeah, absolutely. Get those excusals signed if you need to and or if it's appropriate.
Yeah.
I would summarize all of what everyone said though as meeting, oops, it's not letting, there we go, meeting your IEP timelines. So what does that mean? It means you're going to coach your case managers. And I know that you have a ton of stuff on your plate. So if you can find time to do this, great. If you can't, maybe it happens at a department meeting, maybe it happens in a walking meeting in the hallway while the kids are at recess and you don't both have yard duty. There's a lot of ways these conversations can happen. But one thing that I shared with the case managers and I'm sharing with you as administrators is ask case managers to map out the year's IEPs in August and make sure they include all of the IEP team members on their planning process. I would also suggest that case managers are coached to create a calendar hold for the student's tentative IEP date and invite all of the site-based team members. I would hold off on inviting parents until they've had a conversation closer to the date of the IEP and sent home a notice of meeting. I also recommend that IEPs are initiated on or before the due date in order to meet the timeline. Um, the initiation of the IEP meeting can be as simple as, hey, we're here today. The parent was unable to meet. However, we wanted to initiate the meeting and we're going to come back for a part two. And that's all your notes would say. And it's still an IEP draft. And then the last thing in order to meet IEP timelines would be to pre-meet with parents and staff to help draft the IEP. I know that a lot of us heard in our credential programs, oh my gosh, you can't say pre-meeting, you can't pre-meet, you have to do everything in the IEP meeting. I'm here to tell you that's not true. You can meet with the parents, you can meet with your colleagues, you should meet with your colleagues throughout the year to talk about a student's IEP. There should be things that come up like, hey, how do I implement this accommodation? How does, what is it, what am I supposed to do when little Johnny gets pulled for speech for 20 minutes every day? Like there's lots of conversations that can and should happen over the course of the year. But when the case manager is drafting that IEP, I highly, highly, highly recommend pre-meeting with parents, sharing information, being open to calls from them, speaking with colleagues about their input, putting that into the IEP draft. The only part of the IEP that really shouldn't be drafted is the offer of fate. Um, Different districts do it different ways, but what I've learned is that in this district, we don't draft the offer of FAPE outside of the IEP meeting, even if we make it a point to talk about it and say we're talking about it in the notes. So let's just leave that out. Any questions about these hints and tips? All right. And I'm going to move on to the next one. So if you're wondering what the IEP timelines are, there's about a million different reasons and a million different things you have to meet timelines over. So each of these images is a clickable thing that you can then print out. They're from two different law firms that work with school districts. So this one you have to like know sort of what the timeline is and then go look for the rationale for like what it is that you'll have to meet on by that deadline. And then the other one is more like what just happened. Let's figure out what the timeline is. So okay, so proposing an assessment plan, we need to get, we need to give them 15 days from the date of the assessment plan. Or if we're doing a triennial review, it's a 60-day timeline, blah, 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 etc. So feel free to print whichever one works best for you. I think it's pretty nice that we have different options. I was also going to add a perpetual calendar on here, but I realized it's really easy to find those online. You can search 60-day perpetual calendar and you'll find like the date. If you sent home the assessment plan on this date or the assessment plan is signed on today, when is the IEP due? So those are something that you can find. You can also ask your school psychologist for your site to share that with you, and they have a perpetual calendar that they use for all these deadlines as well. I also wanted to share some resources from SFUSD Legal. So these are two printable resources from the legal team. The one on the left is an IEP checklist for case managers. The one on the right is an administrator's checklist for IEPs. So both of those are really helpful resources, I think. Let's look at the case manager one really quick. So this is, I think, a really long document. However, if case managers follow it, especially newer case managers who are just doing their first few IEPs, if they follow this and check things off as they go, they're going to be in really good shape. The IEP is going to be very close to compliance. And if you don't have a special education background and you as an administrator are thinking like, well, I don't have a sped background. I don't know what to look for in an IEP. Like if they ask me for advice or help or whatever, I don't know what to do. This might be a nice guide for you as well because it outlines exactly what you need to do or what a case manager needs to include in an IEP in order for it to be compliant. And then this one over here is for the one for administrators is much shorter, but same thing. It's just kind of a nice guide for you to have as you dig through IEPs and attend meetings. I know different schools do it different ways, but sometimes you are the only administrator who's going to IEPs, and this will be a really helpful document so that you know what you're looking for at various times. So let me make this full screen again. Any questions so far? It might be a little bit less than an hour. Uh-oh. Screen sharing, resume share. You guys can't see my screen, can you? Let me try again really quick. My screen sharing is paused and it won't resume. Does anybody have any ideas for what makes it do that?
I'm going to take a look at the security settings and see.
Yeah, that's weird. Hang on.
I don't see it too. Oh, there we go. I
There it
see it
goes.
now. Printable IEP resources.
Yep, perfect. I don't know how that happened, but I'm glad it's back. Um, all right. I also wanted to give you a link to a special education legal presentation. I think folks in high school have already seen this, and case managers have seen it at the symposium last a week ago on Monday. So this is there for you as a resource. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Um, this is just some pointers for how to set boundaries. The 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 graphic is for when kids are yelling at you, but more often it's parents. Kids, get dysregulated sometimes, and we give them some, compassion and empathy, and we help them work through things. But sometimes parents need that too. So, there's different things we can say to help them regulate and set some boundaries so that we can come back to the conversation at a later date. One thing I don't love about this graphic is that it's very much like you're talking to a little kid, but if you're talking to a 45-year-old, you might want to frame these a little bit differently. So this is just a quick reference, not a deep dive. And one of the other things that folks mentioned in the chat was building relationships. So that is another huge thing that you can and should do in order to prevent non-compliance. One of the things I've heard a lot of attorneys say at various conferences that I've been to through the ADR world is that people don't sue someone that they like. So So building those relationships is particularly important in avoiding scenarios where people want to file CDE complaints or file for due process. It's really hard to say like, "Ooh, I really like you, but you've screwed up. We're going to have to go to court for this." So there's lots of things you could do. You can be an active listener. You want to ask a lot of questions of the parent rather than saying I would or I think or I feel. And I know I feel statements are important, especially when you're resolving disputes. They're not necessarily helpful when you're in a conversation with a parent. So asking lots of questions and avoiding those I statements. Being available if a parent pops into the office. Again, I know everybody has a million things to do, but even if you can invite them to walk with you to your next meeting or walk with you to another destination and then send them on their way, um, that that means a lot sometimes when a parent doesn't know what else to do but to pop into the office. It's really important to be able to set warm and firm boundaries and expectations. I always like to say boundaries are like a hug. So when you're able to enforce your own personal boundaries with someone who regularly tries to cross them, you can do that firmly and warmly and empathetically. And it makes that person feel more secure because they know exactly what to expect from you. Being open to creative solutions. A lot of times we see disputes over offers of FAPE, goals, and where those services will be delivered. And one of the things I like to say ADR is good for is creative solutions. So, maybe the parent's just asking for 20 more minutes of speech, and that's not a hill you want to die on, and that's an easy concession to make. But sometimes there needs to be more conversation. Like maybe it's, the way the goal is worded is very confusing. Be open to suggestions from the parent and that back and forth. If it's a matter of the location, so whether it's a group or an individual setting, there can be and should be a conversation about like what the best setting actually is for the student. I recently learned that if the setting that the student is being offered or the placement that the student is being offered would only offer minimal improvement over the previous setting, if we're looking at a more restrictive setting, then we need to be looking at the less restrictive setting. Because if it's a minimal improvement, but they've made huge improvements in the less restrictive setting, then we really want to focus on that less restrictive setting. So being open to other ideas and creative solutions. Don't be afraid to say when you don't know something and that you'll look into it. And please, please, please follow up. I cannot tell you how many calls I've gotten a year after a collaborative conference from somebody saying, so and so said they were going to do XYZ in March and it is September. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, let me follow up on that. I'm like, that person doesn't even work here anymore. Like, what do I do? So please follow up. Following up is like one of the most important things you can do for families. And then in a meeting, snacks help. Like nobody's pissed off when there's snacks. And I feel like snacks go over better when they're from staff versus when a family brings it in. Because like I don't know. Have you ever been in an IEP meeting where a family brings snacks? It's I don't know. I find it awkward. It's like, well, I want the snack, but I don't want to concede anything. So I don't know. Anyway, that's just me, but snacks always help. And I just saw someone made a comment. Someone just said yes. Any thoughts or additions to building relationships? Any tricks up your sleeves that you want the group to know? No, I covered them all. I'm really smart. That's a good thing. All right. All right. So back to alternative dispute resolution. So a long time ago, probably about a year ago, I tried to make a Venn diagram saying, what are the benefits of alternative dispute resolution for families and what are the benefits for the school? And what I realized in creating this Venn diagram was that I was kind of saying the same thing on both sides. And then I kept dragging my thoughts back to the middle. So I realized what the purpose of ADR is, or the purpose of ADR is the benefits for both sides. That didn't make sense. The benefits of ADR are for both sides. It's not something that's exclusive for families or exclusive for the schools. These are mutually beneficial things that come out of ADR. So a lot of times there is a balance of power or an imbalance of power. It might be real, it might be perceived, but ADR can help rebalance that power so that you can have a conversation and move forward. But of course, as Marisol said, acknowledging the past too. We can also help to rebuild and repair relationships and build communication skills. I don't know. I think we've all gotten emails or had a conversation with a colleague where we're like, "Ooh, who trained you?" Like a little shocking. So ADR can help retrain people and think about different ways to say the things that they need to say. Alternative dispute resolution can sometimes also help prevent repeats of the same concerns. So if you're wondering, like, do I continue to try to handle this on my own, or do I call Adriana and try to set up some ADR? Um, if you're readdressing the same thing over and over again, and let's say you've had 5 IEP meetings and it's January, you might want to call ADR. You probably would consider calling ADR at about 2 meetings when you're starting to notice that the same pattern is happening and you're having these circular conversations in IEPs. Um, Big one, we want to prevent CDE complaints, due process, and other lawsuits. And then the other one is that it's free access to professional neutrals. And I mentioned that the professional neutrals are the folks that we contract with through the Bar Association. And what is so wonderful about them is that they're neutral to the outcome. They're still humans. They have feelings, they have opinions, they have thoughts, but they're neutral to the outcome of this disagreement. So they really want to help you get to a point where you're happy and you're able to move forward, or the family, if the family is who they're working with one-on-one or in prep work. So it's a really huge benefit. Typically, mediators and professional neutrals charge about $300 an hour, and you can access that for free through the special education department, which is pretty amazing. Anyone else used ADR and have any reasons why you would utilize it again or why you wouldn't? All right. So we have time. Let's start with one case study. So here, let me see how many people we have here so I can decide how I want to do this. We've got 23 people. So maybe, okay, so I am going to put you into small groups and we'll read the case study together aloud. I'll ask people to each read a paragraph. And then you're going to go into your small groups and you're going to discuss the 3 questions. So you're going to identify the primary conflict in the scenario. You're going to talk about how you're going to support your team and the student because, you as an administrator, you have to support your team, but through them, we need to make sure we're supporting that student. And then would you recommend an ADR solution for this scenario? Why or why not? I didn't put why or why not on there. I'm just throwing that in there now to, keep things exciting. But yeah, any questions about the process for analyzing the case studies? All right, so I'm going to ask one person to volunteer, and I'm not going to call on people, but if someone just wants to read out, we'll do the first paragraph, second paragraph, and the third paragraph, 3 different people.
You're a high school assistant principal assigned to a special education, and you pride yourself on your ability to coach and support staff. work with parents and connect with students. But lately you've had one parent who really grinds your gears. The student is in general education with RSP support, which the parent insists is the correct setting. A triennial assessment last school year indicates that the student needs a higher level of support and SDC class for math and ELA, although whether that's mild or mod or severe is up for discussion. You're in what feels like the 50th IEP of the year, and it's only October, listening to the same arguments from the parents and the school team over and over again about why they disagree. What do you do?
Thank you for reading that. So I'm going to go ahead and put you all into breakout rooms, and I'm going to copy and paste the questions into the chat so that you have them when you get to your breakout rooms, okay? So let me do this way. You get to see it all in live. Oops. Oh, I hear people leaving. Does that mean they're afraid that they're gonna they're gonna get called on when they come back? Okay, let me create the breakout room. There'll be 2 or 3 people in each room. All right, rooms are open. You'll be there for 5 minutes. Sometimes it makes sense to go directly to the facilitated IEP. What if no matter what, the parent is like, no collaborative conference, no facilitated IEP. I just want what I want. No, I'm done talking.
Can I ask also, it sounds like it may be a relationship, a conflict between the AP and the parent. Would it be appropriate at that point to switch out the admin for the IEP? Because maybe, you know, that way another admin might give the parent a different you know, opportunity to express themselves, and then they can also hear from a different person as well. So it's not so feeling like it's just one person that is against the, you know, against each other.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. You know, it depends on what works for your school. I know some school sites don't have an assistant principal, so it's, you know, it's you or nobody. But yeah, I think that's also a very valid option. One thing I'd be wary of in that scenario is like if it's parent asking for the administrative change or a different administrator to handle the IEP, I could see that broadening into a request to change the case manager, change the speech pathologist, change the school psych. So I would, you know, handle that with kid gloves and go back to that boundaries topic and figure out what the boundary is and make sure you're empathetically explaining that if you do decide to make a change. But I think that's also a really valid option too, depending on what's going on in the case. I did purposely want to make this case study sound like the assistant principal is super exasperated. Because even if you think you're just keeping that to yourself, or you're walking into your fellow assistant principal's office or your principal's office and being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. This parent did XYZ again. Whether you want it to or not, sometimes that comes out in meetings. So I did want this to sound more exasperated. Obviously, by October, it's not really literally the 50th IEP of the year, but this AP is so stressed out that they feel like it is. So I would say if you've met multiple times and you're still not coming to a resolution, it is a great idea to reach out and talk about ADR as a solution. I will definitely ask you lots of questions about what you've done already and how you envision things moving forward. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention about this case study is that if the parent flat out refuses to participate at all, they're like, nope, no facilitated IEP, no collaborative conference, there's absolutely nothing wrong. You're just not giving me what I want because you don't know your kid as well as I do, which is the literal words I've heard out of a parent's mouth. If you're in a situation like that, you can always do a communication strategy session or multiple communication strategy sessions with either just yourself or the school side of the IEP team with a neutral facilitator, and have a conversation and say, hey, here's what we're anticipating happening. We've seen it happen 3, 4, 5 times because we're on multiple IEPs at this point, and we don't know how to address it. We're stuck. What are your suggestions for moving forward? And the facilitator will likely do a little bit of role play with you. They'll ask you about background from what's happened in the past IEPs. They'll probably ask you about data and kind of taking into account all of that they'll be able to make some suggestions for how you and the team might be able to move forward and what you might be able to suggest, even without a facilitator there. Or they might, if you, the administrator, want to coach the meeting and facilitate the meeting, they might give you some pointers on how to facilitate the meeting to kind of keep things reined in and under control. So that's always an option. If somebody says, no, I won't participate, you can always have a communication strategy session. Yeah. So it is 10:55, and that was a really good talk about this case study. There's another one in here if you want to take a look at it on your own. And I also left in a lot of slides for the presentation that I did with case managers. So there's a lot of resources, a lot of spreadsheets and things that I've utilized to help manage my cases. So if that's something you think might be helpful with your case managers, feel free to share that information. If you need to get in touch with me, let me scroll down. You can contact me here. And if you want to if you're like, no, I don't need to talk to you, I just want to make an ADR request, you can use the QR code or go to that link and fill out a request form. Every ADR request does need to go through that form in some way or another, so we'll have to talk at some point. And I also wanted to let you know that I am building a resource page on our internal SPED webpage. And that'll have sections for administrators, for case managers, for related service providers. And it's not going to be curricular resources, but it will be like what to do in specific scenarios, or templates to follow for writing an IEP, things like that. So if there's any feedback that you want to give, feel free to click on that link or follow the QR code and give me some feedback. I'd love more administrator feedback. And we have 4 more minutes for any lingering questions that you may have.
Sorry, I missed,
Yeah.
you said you left a slide with resources that you had with a case session.
So
which slide is that?
I skipped a bunch of slides in this presentation, but you'll be able to see them in the link. So I think, where did I put it? It might be up farther. Here we go. So I have a draft of a welcome email. There's a spreadsheet to map out all of the IEPs that are coming up. And then this is like a self-review. And you could also do this with your teams if you have time and if you wanted to. So basically, the case manager fills this out, and then either the department chair or an administrator or someone else, a buddy even, it could be a peer, could go through and just verify that all of those things are included in the IEP before it's affirmed. So that's something you can use. This is the spreadsheet that I used to map out everyone that needed to come to IEP meetings. And this is, if you make a copy, you can adapt that however, whoever uses it can adapt it however they need. And then a welcome email draft to say hi to parents at the beginning of the year from the case manager. And then some tips for using the template. So not sharing your personal phone number, making sure you delete all the little template-y things in the email above. If you have, let's say you have half your caseload Spanish speaking parents and half your caseload is English speaking parents, you can create an email that's 2 columns. So on one side you have English, on one side you have Spanish, so that they're not stacked on top of each other and people can see that it's right there in front of their faces. And making sure to BCC the parents. Parents, it's not a what's it called? I can't think of the violation. It's not a violation if you CC parents on things, but it's just not best practice. It's not a good look.
Okay. Thank you for sharing those.
So those are in there. I just skipped them during the presentation. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Thank you all so much. You are welcome to get in touch with me anytime, even if it's just like you said this thing in the presentation and I'm really confused. Happy to clarify anything. If you want to talk to someone else who's been involved in the ADR process, whether it's a facilitated IEP, a collaborative conference, a communication strategy session, I can reach out to various folks in the district and see if they're willing to be a thought partner for you. But otherwise, thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you for joining me this morning.